6:17 a.m. Strait of Hormuz. The first light of morning spread slowly across the water, turning the sea from black to deep blue in a transition so gradual it seems almost reluctant. Aboard the guided missile cruiser, USS Philippine Sea, the morning watch has just begun its rotation. Coffee is poured, screens are checked. The routine of another day in one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth settles into place with the practiced ease of thousands of previous mornings. The Carrier Strike Group, built around USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, maintains its eastward transit, moving through waters where the coastlines of Iran and Oman narrow the passage to barely 21 nautical miles at its tightest point. Every ship in the formation has passed through this choke point before. Every crew member understands that these waters carry a weight that cannot be measured in depth charts or navigation hazards alone. This is where global energy markets meet geopolitical friction, where 40% of the world's seaborne oil trade flows through a corridor narrow enough that both shores can be seen simultaneously on a clear day, and where the U.S. Navy maintains presence not because it is easy, but because the alternative would be far more costly. On this particular morning, there is nothing to suggest that the transit will differ from dozens of others completed in recent months. The formation holds standard spacing. Electronic emissions remain at normal levels. Flight operations have not yet commenced for the day. The strike group moves as it always moves, projecting capability through presence rather than action, demonstrating commitment through consistency rather than confrontation. Yet somewhere beyond the visible horizon, decisions have already been made, assets have been positioned, timing has been calculated, and what will unfold over the next several hours will test not the firepower of the American fleet, but something far more difficult to measure: its patience, its discipline, and its ability to control a situation without being the first to escalate it. The initial contacts appear on radar displays not as a sudden swarm, but as individual points emerging from the electronic noise that constantly surrounds any formation operating in congested waters. The first is detected at extreme range, flying at an altitude so low that its return signature pulses in and out of visibility, masked by the reflections bouncing off wave crests below. A second contact materializes minutes later, this one higher, holding a steady track that parallels the strike group's course without closing distance. Then a third, then a fourth. None of these objects transmit identification signals. None respond to radio queries. None display the navigation lighting required of civilian aircraft operating in international airspace. They simply exist at the edge of detection, moving with a deliberateness that removes any possibility of coincidence. The classification process begins immediately. Altitude profiles are compared against known flight characteristics. Speed measurements are cross-referenced with databases containing thousands of previous observations. Radar cross-sections are analyzed to estimate size and configuration. Within minutes, the assessment solidifies. These are unmanned aerial vehicles. Iranian. Likely Shahed-series platforms based on flight behavior, though positive identification remains difficult at this range. They are not approaching directly. They are not retreating. They are positioning themselves in a pattern that suggests observation rather than attack, presence rather than aggression. This is not an ambush. It is an announcement. What makes this situation particularly complex is what it is designed to provoke. A carrier strike group operating in the Persian Gulf carries enough firepower to eliminate threats at ranges measured in hundreds of miles. The aircraft aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower can reach targets before those targets even know they are being tracked. The escort ships surrounding the carrier bristle with missiles capable of engaging everything from sea-skimming cruise missiles to high-altitude reconnaissance platforms. In pure military terms, the approaching UAVs represent no meaningful threat to the formation's survival. But military calculations are only part of the equation. Every action taken by the U.S. fleet will be observed, recorded, and analyzed. Every response will be measured against international law, alliance expectations, and the broader strategic relationship between Washington and Tehran. A premature engagement could be spun as American aggression. An insufficient response could be interpreted as weakness. The space between those two outcomes is narrow, and navigating it requires a precision that no weapon system can provide. Inside the Combat Information Center of USS Philippine Sea, the atmosphere shifts without any visible change. Voices remain calm, movements remain measured, but the quality of attention transforms as operators transition from passive monitoring to active tracking. Each UAV receives its own designation. Flight paths are projected forward in time, creating predicted positions that allow the system to anticipate where targets will be rather than simply recording where they are. The entire surveillance architecture of the strike group begins to focus, not with alarm, but with the quiet intensity of a system designed for exactly this type of situation. On the surface of the water, additional contacts begin to appear. These are not aircraft. They are small, fast, maneuverable craft operating in loose coordination at distances that place them outside the immediate defensive perimeter, but well within observation range. IRGC fast attack boats. Their presence in these waters is not unusual. Iranian naval forces regularly operate throughout the Persian Gulf, and encounters between American and Iranian vessels occur with enough frequency that standard procedures exist for managing them. But the timing of their appearance, synchronized with the aerial approach, suggests coordination rather than coincidence. This is not a random patrol. This is a layered probe designed to apply pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The fast attack boats do not charge toward the formation. They maintain distance, occasionally accelerating before slowing again, sometimes altering course abruptly before returning to their previous headings. Each maneuver forces American radar operators to update their assessments. Each course change introduces a moment of uncertainty that must be resolved before attention can shift elsewhere. The boats are not threatening in any individual sense, but collectively they consume resources, they occupy bandwidth, they create a persistent demand for attention that cannot be dismissed. Above the water, the UAV contacts continue to evolve. The high-altitude platforms maintain their parallel tracks, drifting slowly closer to the strike group's course without ever committing to a direct approach. Their purpose becomes increasingly clear with each passing minute. They are watching, recording, cataloging the positions of escort ships, the timing of radar sweeps, the patterns of communication traffic that pulse invisibly through the airspace surrounding the formation. Every piece of information they gather will be transmitted back to shore-based facilities where analysts will study it, compare it against previous observations, and use it to refine future operations. The low-altitude UAVs present a different challenge. Flying just above the wave tops, they exploit the physical limitations of radar systems that struggle to separate genuine targets from the endless clutter generated by moving water. Their flight paths are erratic, shifting altitude by mere meters to maintain the boundary between detection and invisibility. When one briefly disappears from the tracking display, operators must decide whether it has descended below radar coverage, moved behind a surface vessel, or simply been lost in a moment of electronic noise. Each disappearance consumes time. Each reacquisition requires verification. The cumulative effect is a steady drain on the cognitive resources of everyone involved in monitoring the approach. Admiral Richard Hayes, commanding the strike group from the flag bridge of USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, receives updates through a carefully structured information flow designed to provide clarity without overwhelming. He does not need to know the precise altitude of each UAV or the exact speed of each fast attack boat. What he needs to know is whether the situation is approaching a threshold that requires his direct involvement. For now, it is not. The contacts remain outside the boundaries that would trigger automatic defensive responses. The approach continues, but it continues within parameters that the fleet has planned for. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of the American response. There is no visible reaction. The formation does not accelerate. The escort ships do not maneuver to interpose themselves between the approaching platforms and the carrier. No aircraft launch from the flight deck to investigate the contacts. To an outside observer, it would appear that the U.S. Navy is simply ignoring the situation developing around it. But this appearance conceals a reality that is far more significant. Every second that the Iranian platforms spend inside the observation envelope of the strike group is a second during which they are being tracked with a precision they cannot match. The radar systems aboard American escort ships are not simply detecting the UAVs. They are building detailed profiles of their flight characteristics. They are measuring the electromagnetic signatures of their guidance systems. They are recording the communication patterns that link them to their controllers. When the low-altitude platforms dip and weave to evade tracking, those evasion patterns are logged and analyzed. When the high-altitude platforms adjust their positions to maintain optimal observation angles, those adjustments reveal information about sensor capabilities and operational priorities. The fast attack boats on the surface are subject to the same scrutiny. Their engine signatures are captured by passive acoustic systems. Their radar emissions are cataloged and compared against known Iranian naval electronics. The precise timing of their maneuvers is recorded, allowing analysts to identify coordination patterns that might indicate command relationships or communication delays. Everything the Iranian forces do during this probe becomes data that the United States can use to understand Iranian capabilities, refine American tactics, and prepare for future encounters. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher, burning away the morning haze and sharpening the visual horizon. Flight operations aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower commence according to schedule, with aircraft launching and recovering in a carefully choreographed sequence that continues regardless of the activity developing beyond the defensive perimeter. This is not bravado. It is a calculated demonstration that the Iranian probe has not disrupted normal operations. The message it sends is simple but powerful. Your presence has been noted. It has not changed anything. The Iranian platforms do not withdraw. They maintain their positions, occasionally adjusting to compensate for the movement of the strike group as it continues its transit. The fast attack boats on the surface shadow the formation, keeping pace without closing distance. The situation achieves a kind of equilibrium, a sustained tension that neither escalates nor resolves. For the crews aboard the American ships, this is perhaps the most demanding phase. Maintaining vigilance against a threat that does not attack requires a different kind of discipline than responding to one that does. Then the equilibrium breaks. One of the low-altitude UAVs begins to close distance. Its approach is not dramatic. There is no sudden acceleration, no dive toward the formation. The change is measured in hundreds of meters per minute, a gradual reduction in the buffer zone that separates observation from intrusion. On tracking displays, the contact's projected path begins to intersect with the boundaries that define the defensive envelope of the strike group. The decision framework that governs what happens next was established long before this moment. There are no emergency meetings. There is no lengthy deliberation about appropriate responses. The thresholds exist. The authorities have been delegated. When a contact demonstrates hostile intent or enters a defined exclusion zone without authorization, the response is predetermined. The only question is whether the current situation meets the criteria. It does. The UAV continues its approach. Radio calls go unanswered. The platform shows no indication of altering its course. At 11:47 local time, a single SM-2 missile launches from the vertical launch system of USS Philippine Sea. The engagement is brief. The UAV, traveling at a speed measured in tens of knots, has no capacity to evade a weapon traveling at Mach 3. The target disappears from tracking displays. There is no explosion visible from the deck of nearby ships. At the altitudes and distances involved, the engagement is simply a contact that exists and then does not. Within minutes, the remaining UAVs begin to alter their behavior. The high-altitude platforms break from their parallel tracks and turn away from the formation. The surviving low-altitude contacts descend even closer to the water and alter course toward the Iranian coastline. On the surface, the fast attack boats reduce speed and open distance, their aggressive maneuvering replaced by steady withdrawals toward territorial waters. No second missile is fired. No pursuit is initiated. The strike group continues its transit as if the engagement had been a minor interruption rather than a significant event. Flight operations aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower proceed without pause. The formation maintains its speed and heading. By early afternoon, the last Iranian contacts have faded from surveillance displays, leaving behind nothing but data. The outcome of this encounter will never appear in official statements. There will be no press conference announcing the successful defense of an American carrier group. There will be no detailed accounting of Iranian losses or American restraint. In the public narrative, this day will be indistinguishable from any other day of routine operations in the Persian Gulf. But within the circles that study these interactions, the significance is clear. Iran deployed a coordinated package of aerial and surface assets designed to probe American defenses, gather intelligence, and test response thresholds. The probe was sophisticated, patient, and carefully calibrated to apply pressure without triggering immediate retaliation. It represented the accumulation of years of experience operating against American forces in these waters. And it failed. It failed not because the American response was overwhelming, but because it was precise. A single engagement, initiated only when clearly justified, terminated the probe without creating an escalation pathway. The Iranian platforms that survived gained nothing that they had not already observed in previous encounters. The platforms that did not survive provided a clear demonstration of where the boundaries lie and what crossing them costs. For the commanders who planned the Iranian operation, the results will require careful analysis. The coordination between aerial and surface assets worked as intended. The low-altitude flight profiles successfully complicated American tracking. The patient approach successfully extended the duration of the probe. But none of these tactical successes changed the fundamental outcome. When the threshold was crossed, the response was immediate and effective. The space around the American formation remains under American control. Admiral Hayes files his report through classified channels. The intelligence gathered during the encounter flows to analysts who will spend weeks extracting every possible insight from the data. The crews aboard the ships of the strike group return to their normal routines, knowing that another probe will come eventually and that when it does, they will respond exactly as they did today. The Persian Gulf does not become safer because of what happened. The underlying tensions between the United States and Iran remain unresolved. The strategic importance of these waters ensures that both sides will continue to operate here, continue to observe each other, and continue to test the boundaries of acceptable behavior. But within that ongoing competition, a specific lesson has been reinforced. Control of these waters does not belong to the side willing to take the greatest risks. It belongs to the side capable of deciding when risk becomes unacceptable and acting on that decision without hesitation or excess. The United States did not need to fire first. It did not need to escalate. It needed only to wait, to watch, and to act at the precise moment when action became necessary. Everything before that moment was observation. Everything after was consequence. USS Dwight D. Eisenhower completes its transit of the Strait of Hormuz and continues into the Gulf of Oman. Behind it, the waters return to their normal state of contested calm. Merchant vessels resume their passages. Fishing boats return to their grounds. The only evidence that anything unusual occurred exists in classified databases and in the memories of those who watched it unfold. This is how power operates in spaces where direct confrontation serves no one's interests. Not through constant displays of force, but through the demonstrated ability to apply force precisely when required. The next probe will come. It always does. And when it does, the same question will be answered the same way. Who controls this space? The side that tests, or the side that decides when the test ends? If you want to understand why American naval dominance in these waters persists, despite constant challenges, subscribe to this channel, because what happens next in the Persian Gulf will determine more than regional security. It will shape the future of great power competition at sea.